Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you and welcome to today's session, where we'll be talking about the next frontier in automotive industry, creating ecosystem-driven customer experiences. My name is Wei Min from SGInnovate. We are a Singapore government-owned organization that builds big tech innovations in areas such as AI, medical technologies, quantum technologies, and autonomous systems. We will also invest in deep tech startups across various industries such as financial services, healthcare, urban mobility, just to name a few. A good part of our work also involves building a global community of scientists, investors, corporate innovators, and talents through knowledge sharing events such as this. Today, we are very happy to partner with Ogilvy Consulting to present to you this webinar sharing on the next frontier in the automotive industry, on how corporates, businesses, and startups can come together to form a greater ecosystem to create better customer experiences for the masses. With no further ado, allow me to pass the time to Suresh, a consulting partner from Ogilvy Consulting, for the presentation. Suresh, please.
Thank you, Wayman. That was nice of you. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, in case you're joining from outside of this time zone. It's my pleasure to be on this discussion, and thanks, Wayman, for the opportunity. Right. Let me start sharing my presentation. Just a bit of housekeeping. There is a Q&A option within the chat, within the Zoom window that you're looking at. Feel free to post Q&A questions at any time as you would please. I've got some of my colleagues on this call, and they will be able to look at it, and I'll be answering them towards the end of the session. I hope that's correct. Yeah. So I think the automotive industry, it's a fairly complex one, and one that's been through quite a bit of pressure of late. Already before the pre-COVID situation, they were under pressure as an industry, not just the automotive industry, but all of the affiliated industries around the automotive industry. One of the big disruptions, or two big disruptions that all of us are aware of, is one, the rise of autonomous vehicles. It's still not mainstream in any parts of the world. It's in very small pockets that it's being tried out, I think. But the second thing was also the whole mobility as a service in multiple shapes and forms. And that's something that's ubiquitous in our life. But beyond those big disruptions, which I think the industry has openly embraced now, the COVID situation has made some more complications come into the picture. I think one of the things we foresee, possibly, time will tell us the answer, is if there's going to be a shift back to buying more and more vehicles for own use and for the family's use, to avoid a situation where they're sitting inside vehicles that are shared by others at different points in time. Or maybe the ownership will further decline altogether because of economic pressures. That's to be seen. So when we thought about what's the best topic that we should be covering, these were some of the thoughts that were running through our mind. But there's enough and more literature written about all these things. Almost all of the large consulting firms talk about this in some shape and form. But one area that we felt was not being addressed properly is the whole point of touch with the customer, whether it's online, whether it's offline, whether it's maintenance and service, or whether it's purchase, right? The customer experience is one of the most critical things, and inevitably it's a hygiene factor. But I don't think enough has been said about it, right? The layer that we wanted to add on top of it is many of these industries, and very prominently the auto industry, has reached a tipping point where one single enterprise cannot provide everything that every customer is asking for. And a lot of times the customers explicitly are not seeking out things from the industry or from the the company they're buying things from. Many of these things are unstated, and the only way to fulfill them is by building a group of partners or an ecosystem around yourself, or being a part of an ecosystem, collectively providing the customer experiences that your customer is seeking, right? So that's probably the big shift that we'll see going forward. It's already becoming mainstream in other industries like retail, FMCG, through online commerce and the rise of platforms, but we'll see more and more of that in the automotive industry. Right? And we as Ogilvy Consulting take pride in the fact that we identify such trends much in advance and work towards it very consciously. Most of you must have heard of Ogilvy as the advertising agency. It's been in Singapore for about 20 plus years, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe much longer as well. But as an industry, the advertising industry, Ogilvy, with the founder David Ogilvy, was one of the first creators of the industry itself, way back in the 60s and 70s, if I'm not mistaken, right? And Ogilvy Consulting is a part of Ogilvy as the agency goes. We're down at Robinson Road, and glad to have this opportunity with SGInnovate, like I said, right? So let me take you through the presentation a bit. I'm Suresh Chivikula. I'm a partner. with Ogilvy Consulting. We've got three main practices, and I focus on the digital transformation part of the work across ASEAN, India, and parts of North Asia as well on a need basis, all the way until Japan. Right. I've had the opportunity to present this exact same paper on two other occasions. One was in Singapore to the auto industry. We had some very high quality participation from everyone from Comfort, Delgro to Toyota to Lexus and quite a few other brands. I also had the opportunity to present this after authoring it myself with one of my colleagues in Shanghai, and there was a rich participation in Shanghai as well. And in both these places, they've given us some good feedback, and I hope you'll come to like this as well. So before I jump into the presentation itself, I thought I'll start off by having a bit of an icebreaker, though we're not going to have a group participation on this. This is an advertisement, and clearly you can see the hood of the car, the wonderful logo that stands there. It's a Rolls-Royce. The advertisement is from 1959, created by Ogilvy. And if you notice, the advertisement does not speak about the power of the car. It does not speak about the strength of the engine or the luxury of the seats. All it tells is the loudest noise you hear inside the Rolls-Royce is an electric clock. And that's when you're driving at 60 miles an hour, 100 kilometers an hour, right? So that's the power of what experiences can create. When it comes to engaging with customers, you need to appeal to what makes most sense for them. And here's an instance early up in the times of the automotive industry, I would say as it was hitting maturity, that we looked at an advertisement from that lens, right? And this has been core to our heart, both in terms of creativity as well as customer experience, putting your brand in the front. I mean, I have also had a chance to look at the all of the participants. Thanks a lot for giving us your valuable time and being on the webinar at this point. And one of the things I noticed is it's not just automotive industry players who are on the webinar, but a lot of you are from affiliated industries, either from tier 1, tier 2 suppliers, or complete ecosystem players like online location providers, for example, right, or regulators. And this is perfectly fine. This is the kind of audience that absolutely adds more value to the industry when they come together as a group. And when we talk about ecosystem, every one of you has a role to play in this conversation, right, with the end customers. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is to provide a better experience to the customer, right? That's the intention of the whole thing. So let me go through the rest of the presentation. We spoke a bit about the revolution that's been happening, right? Shift in ownership. In the Q&A session or the chat function, it would be great if you could let me know your views on if you think car ownership is going to find an uptrend or if it's going to find a downtrend, and what's going to be the substitute. Maybe that is the substitute. The substitute is work from home, perhaps, right? Most of us are at homes right now and speaking. The second big revolution that we see, we don't see so much of this in Singapore because our government's done a fantastic job of giving us all of the infrastructure we need. But in many other places across the region, all of you are well-traveled folks, I'm sure, you'll find that the urban infrastructure is sorely lacking, while at the same time, until recently, we had a constant increase in sales of automotive vehicles, right? Both two-wheelers as well as four-wheelers, right? And this is a bigger problem in emerging economies, but that doesn't mean that the developed economies are free of it. They've got their own challenges, at least in the large urban centers that we look at. The other subtext to that is the rise of eco-friendly practices, right? I think the whole COVID situation has helped the world wake up to the reality of what could a clean world look like, right? With all of us staying home, though it came under unfortunate circumstances. But there will be an increased thought that leads us towards, a greener view towards it, right? It's always been around, and hopefully this will be a place of acceleration for it. But the automotive players have a responsibility to think about it consciously, and we should be happy to see that most of them do put in the effort to think in this direction proactively, right? The third thing is about digital technologies and business models. Enough said, almost everyone's getting disrupted, but here's where the automotive industry has responded by embracing this disruption, by acquiring such talent of technologies for intellectual property, or for that matter, building in-house talent by working with startups, right? So multiple models have prevailed. Eventually, almost every major OEM that I talk to, in some shape and form, are talking about mobility as a service. They are talking about autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles and all of these things. And quite a few of them are deep into commercially being there already. So here's another thing. It's closer home to us. As you can see, there's multiple cities covered here. Singapore is in Rona Batri, but it's closer home to us because the organization that runs the study partly is based out of Singapore. the Center for Livable Cities, and in collaboration with the Urban Land Institute in Asia Pac. This is from a 2019 study. The 2020 study, the last time I checked, is not yet out, I think, and hopefully there will be one. What you see is of interest, right? Active mobility has a very big role to play in many of these places, and that includes last mile connectivity, cycling, and 2 feet. You're walking for that matter, wherever you're putting your own physical energy to move around. But at the same time, the shared options, both in terms of digital platforms like your Comfort, Delgro, Grab, and Gojek, and taxi services, are also prominent in many of these places. There's a bit of a color mismatch, but it's present across all these cities. The share of each of these things is constantly shifting. By and large, across the cities, there are differences that you notice, but there is some sort of synchronization as well, right? And these are things that it becomes important because automotive players and even the affiliates of the ecosystem have to take note of this and see, how do I expand into a multimodal approach? That's to me the biggest takeaway from a slide like this, right? It's not necessary that every brand has to think in this direction, but if there is value and if there is a good role that you can play in that ecosystem, absolutely, please embrace it. Where do we see the next wave of innovation, right? And again, these are things that we put down based on multiple discussions with multiple clients. A lot of these being advice that we give to our own clients and tell them how to tackle these problems that they face, right, across industry. It's been written with an Asia Pacific flavor, but it's very much applicable across the world to a great extent, I would say, right? The first one is thinking about larger day-to-day experiences. As much as your customers think about vehicles or automotive cars as movement from point A to point B, the part that's not visible to us, the part that even the customer will not explicitly perhaps state, is what happens before he gets into the car or she gets into the car, and what happens after they get out of the car in the evening, after the commute is done, right? There is a role that automotive players can have in the experience that can last throughout the day, right? Without necessarily being inside the car, but becoming a critical part of the customer's journey through the day, beyond just point A and B. There are some examples I'll show as we progress into the presentation, but it'll be of interest for all of us, I think, to consciously think of what else can I do for my customer. The good thing is some of this will be monetized by all of us, but it has to be at a fair value to the customer, right? That's kind of critical, I would say. And the other thing is you don't have to do it all. You will always find ecosystem. You'll have to build towards ecosystem play because there are certain things that some of the other ecosystem players are very good at. And by combining both the experiences and capabilities, you provide maximum value to your customers. So that's the first one, thinking of this as larger day-to-day experiences, and it's a recurring theme you'll see through the presentation. The second one is about having open communications with both partners, competitors, and customers. It's important to underline this. While open communications, the phrase seems to suggest it's about talking openly, being clean about the ideas and sharing them across boundaries. It's equally about the technology behind it. Today, with APIs or application programmable interfaces, for those of you who aren't from a technical background, are easy ways by which you could expose the systems within one company or enterprise and into the systems of another enterprise. And that's how data flows in the easiest of manners. By doing this in a seamless way, there is a new set of value that you can create with much more speed, much more accuracy, eventually creating value for your customers, but also for yourselves in the process, right? And here's what's important. When we talk about creating an ecosystem, I've used this term quite a few times already. The one way by which I've seen a lot of enterprises address this is to assign it to one or two people from the chief strategy officer's team, perhaps, and think of a couple of people we can partner with, right? A couple of organizations we can partner with. While that's one approach, if you're trying to do something at scale with end customer experience in mind, it may not always fly. There needs to be some semblance of a structure, a method to the madness, as I would put it, to come towards that direction. And I'll show you one such framework, but just to be clear about what an ecosystem is, if you speak to 100 people in the industry, I'm sure we will have 100 definitions of it, by and large. Even if I were to take a poll right now as to what's the definition of ecosystem, I'm sure we'll get multiple opinions, and none of them would be necessarily wrong. They would all be right, I would say. But here's our view towards it. It's an environment where customers move from one service or product into another one seamlessly, right? And these services are offered by multiple enterprises. There is a network effect. I think Uber and Airbnb sort of pioneered it in the West, but there is network effects we see in everything these days. And the third thing is, a lot of times there are formal or contractual partnerships, but a lot of times it happens informally as well, right? But platforms being very open-ended. But the most important one is ecosystems help create value to the customer, whether it's explicitly mentioned or not by the customer, which is beyond what each of the individual entities within the ecosystem can provide. I think that's the big takeaway. I mean, a lot of you must be wondering, am I the right webinar? This is about automotive. I've consciously chosen an industry and a brand that's outside of the automotive world, or maybe has a very indirect linkage to it. This is our own DBS, voted the best digital bank a couple of years ago, but last year was voted the best bank. They've got multiple marketplaces, and a doff of the hat to DBS. They've done a fantastic job in thinking about it from a platform or an ecosystem play, right? Multiple marketplaces that have been created, close to 100 APIs. If any of you are from DBS in the webinar, please hit us up. We would love to hear from you as well. But what's important, let's look at the travel marketplace. They've partnered with Singapore Airlines, including Shop, Expedia Group, as well as Chubb. So the next time, if a client who's a wealth management account holder within DBS is thinking of flying, there's a very high likelihood that it's DBS that's structuring the holiday using all the partners, as opposed to Expedia or Kayak or any of the other ones, right? So that's the power of the marketplace. Let's look at our version for the automotive world of that, right? And here's a simple framework we've set out. Obviously, in the interest of both time as well as the forum that we are on, we've not done a deep dive, but enough for us to have a provocation in our own minds to see how we can tackle this. We look at this as a 3-layer thing. There are loose interlinkages between the layers, but they do operate independently as well. So you can pick and choose. The first one is the theme within which you want to create this ecosystem, right? Sometimes the theme is a very specific type of experience. Pardon me. Sometimes the theme is about targeting a specific type of customer, right? A few things that we see as an example, HWW or healthcare, wellness, and well-being. This has become a very, very significant theme, right? Until 1 or 2 years ago, I was also a bit, holding this out with trepidation as to seeing, is this something that's working at scale? Is this something that the masses also want? Or is it just limited to certain types of hyper segments, right? But the more and more I interact with clients in the last 2 years, I can see that this is a mainstream requirement. Many of them look at this in a very, very strong, conscious manner. And it's healthcare, wellness, and well-being, because it's also about the mind, body, soul. It's all of those things coming together. If you, as an automotive brand, can address that, you have a ready customer base to talk to, right? A customer base that's very vocal and very involved in it. But being an automotive player, you may not always be in a situation where you're addressing them directly, which is why the need for an ecosystem play or partnering with a group of companies or enterprises who resonate with your own brand principles comes into picture, right? And then your customer starts to see the value of it. And this cannot be done at lip service or purely at a branding level. Despite being from Ogilvy, which is a branding agency or an advertising agency, I'll tell you clearly, unless there is value you're genuinely creating for your customers, it doesn't fly. Right? The second thing, the middle layer, is about influence and channels. In a way, it's about market outreach. There are examples behind each of these, which I'll walk through in a bit. What this translates to in terms of market outreach is you have to be where your customers are, right? And a lot of times, it's not the dealerships. In fact, in the post-COVID times, it's not going to be the dealerships for quite some time, I think. The automotive industry, though in some regions, in some segments, especially at the mass market level, perhaps, has started showing some changes in this direction. But by and large, all of the sales happen through dealerships by the customer physically visiting the place. Of course, you've got your online research that happens before it, right? But if you can be present at the right locations, either through content providers, social media influencers is sort of beat into death. It's a commonplace thing. But there are many more ways by which you could be present in the lives of the consumers, so the customers, but in line with where they are present. That's going to be helpful for you as a brand, as well as the value that you provide to your customer. And the last thing is about foundational elements. A classic case traditionally has been insurance, right? Partly because of regulatory reasons. Dealerships provide that option within the services suite that they provide when you buy a vehicle. But there are a lot more foundational needs and wants that a customer has come up with. The way we differentiate it is a want is something that's probably not stated, probably not just a hygiene factor, but something a little more fancy, but a need is absolutely basic, right? As an example, audio and podcast tie-ups. almost all of the brands, at least at the higher segment of the vehicles that they sell, are consciously thinking about it. Technology has played a big role in making this easy. Android Auto, Car OS, all of these have already got some tie-ups to make this much easier. Right. So these are the three ways by we look at the same pyramid. Strategic differentiation is about the core of your ecosystem. What's the theme that you want to play with? As an example, she's Mercedes. Some of you, if you are from the Mercedes world or the Daimler world, please feel free to post some questions or comments. We would be very happy about that. She's Mercedes is a fantastic platform. And as you can see with the title or the branding of the platform itself, She's Mercedes, it clearly resonates with women empowerment, right? What they've done is to take a combination of a networking event, a series of networking events, a print magazine, and a digital hub, all of it together, right? And put it together under the brand of She's Mercedes. They aren't consciously targeting customers. It is open to anyone who's got an interest in listening to women empowerment and feeling empowered themselves. So there is a clear case of genuinity that they come with. And I'm not just trying to make this one of those flashy things that they're offering to just customers, right? For example, Sophia, who was a Formula 3 race driver a few years ago, very nearly had a fatal crash, could have lost her life, but over a period of a few months or years, she recovered to the point where she could go back to the track, I think. Sophia was part of the discussions in one of the events at She's Mercedes, right? Now that's the kind of empowerment that they're talking about, inspiring each other. And when you do that, you are very subtly also appealing to a large customer base of women who are looking at now Mercedes as someone who talks to them in their voice, which is critical. Again, like I said, it has to be genuine and it has to come from the heart of the brand and not just be something that's gimmicky with the intention of purely pushing through the marketing funnel. That happens to be a happy byproduct and it will happen, right? Another case, this is with Rolls-Royce, as you can see, and it's about an app called Whispers. Last we checked, it was still available, and it allows you to create extremely private, extremely exclusive concierges, or rather provides you as a concierge service and create travel requirements according to your need, right? But this is appealing to the theme of luxury or hyper luxury in this case, just like the She's Mercedes platform was appealing to the theme of women empowerment, right? When it comes to market outreach, we spoke about it. There's both influence as well as channels. But here's one example. I kind of love this example. Again, in our research, we found Maserati doing this. But please forgive me in case there's a lot of brands that are already doing it, or if Maserati has stopped doing this at some level, right? This is on Taobao, specifically in China. They picked two cities, Shanghai and Beijing, two of the biggest ones. What it allows you to do is on Taobao, you can go and create Maserati has put together a gaming experience by working with partners again from the ecosystem, where the customer or potential customer can go and engage, right? All of that starts to build a persona. I mean, all of us by now are exposed to terms like personas and customer journey maps and so on. But here is a case that literally is building a persona based on actual data and actual interactions that's happening within a platform like Taobao, right? Once they've got a rich platform, it's slowly nudging you towards the dealership, both in Shanghai as well as Beijing. And what happens? Very true to the omni-channel world that we live in, which experiences have to hop from one place to another. And mind you, not all brands are doing a great job of that right now. Once you are at the dealership, using a combination of technologies like AI and FR, facial recognition, your avatar is matched with you as you walk into the dealership, right? So that experience becomes richer and richer as you walk in. And the sales team is well aware of who you are, what's your interests, what have you done on the game, all within the realms of privacy that's the law of the land. And you have a wonderful conversation with the salesperson, which you otherwise would not have had, right? So there is a very focused discussion, which a brand like Maserati can take forward. Now, two things to say. While we're talking about examples like Rolls-Royce, Maserati, any of them, this is not about only the high-end extreme luxury brands. Using technology, in fact, I would say the mass brands, the semi-luxury brands, all of them have an equal capability, if not more, to take this at scale and make it appeal to a broad section of customers. It is about putting on that thinking cap, spending that first 4 to 6 weeks ideating on this, and very rapidly launching something that works best for us. Yeah. Foundational needs, right? General Motors. I've consciously picked General Motors because they've figured out a way by which, in fact, a lot of companies, including Volkswagen, for example, has figured out ways by which they can work with multiple partners to create an ecosystem. And these partners they work with are competitors in the field, right? So Amazon Alexa, I was telling a little while ago, talk about experiences that go beyond point A to B, which is where you drive the car, right? Alexa would be at your home. You would be picking up conversations with Alexa, querying it and asking questions. That same experience, that same Alexa identity can come into the car, and it becomes one complete conversation that you're soon having, right? And you can see the kind of comments that Mr. Chamaru, who's the vice president, who was the vice president at the point we wrote this white paper, uh, you know, uh, for global connected services, his point of view, right? We've listened to our customers and the insights are clear. They want to carry these ecosystems into their vehicles, right? Again, all of this within the realms of personal data, not getting into hyper listening or encryptedness, right? For every outlier case that you hear, the majority are very happy with the outcome of what Alexa can provide to them, right? So that's important. And they've integrated this with the Eco Auto functionalities already for Amazon Eco. But GM didn't stop there. They've also done the same thing with Google Assistant and taken it beyond one level of just using maps, right? So these are more foundational, right? Podcasts as another example, or the ability to listen to music and as a part of your car's ecosystem have already been cracked as a code maybe a decade ago. It's hygiene and table stakes at this point, but more and more things are becoming foundational needs. And you'll see that there is an important point about monetization of all these additional values you're creating. Not everything can or should be monetized, right? Some of these, if you try to monetize, will drive your customer away. And you have to make sure that whatever you're trying to monetize provides more than enough value for that amount of per month money charges that you're going to take from the customer in the long run. So we spoke about a framework, an ecosystem framework, and how do you go about building it? Feel free to use that pyramid as a starting point to discover what is the theme that my brand makes the most sense out of, and what segment do I have to look at, or what experience do I have to look at. Then there are channels for outreach, and there are foundation requirements. What is the combination of different partners that can help me build an ecosystem of this nature, and how do I enable it? That's one part of the conversation we had. But the second part is about the macro trends within the industry itself, right? I've broadly put them over here. Not all of them are applicable to everyone. And please take note that it's not just the auto industry. I cannot reiterate this enough times. It's about everyone within the ecosystem. They have a role to play. You're either part of a platform or you're anchoring a platform yourself. And a lot of times these are also competing with each other, and inter-platform movements do happen. The She's Mercedes example, proud to say that Ogilvy had a big role to play in it, right? We sort of put that together for Mercedes, and it was a fair bit of success for us, for Mercedes and us. So the ecosystem macro trends we see, if you can't beat them, acquire them. This is true about technologies as well as talent. Again, while I've had a tongue-in-cheek line to describe that, what we're talking about literally is the need for a lot more collaboration. The industry has realized that it's going to be time up if they don't react fast enough. Big barriers like capital expenses are seemingly becoming lesser and lesser barriers with easier access to capital and even lesser capital required in some cases. But what's going to be important is to find a way by which you can work with this talent, right? I think this was in the Shanghai event when I was speaking that one of the vendors, I won't quote them, said, typically when an OEM comes to us or supplier, tier 1 or tier 2 comes to us and tells us, can you put up a plant of this type? We go back to them in a span of about 18 to 20 weeks, with a complete detailed blueprint on how this can be done, right? Elon Musk, Tesla, came out to them and they said, no, I'm going to need this in about 4 to 6 weeks. And they said, it's impossible. There's no way we can pull it off. Musk said, either pull it off or I won't be able to continue working with you guys. Of course, this is not Musk, right? This is Tesla that's talking. And I think this company managed to come up with it. The kind of speed that you need requires ecosystems to come together. That's what the vendor, this particular supplier did, brought together multiple companies to collectively address what Tesla was looking for at that point. Regulators play a big role in this. I think more and more regulators in many countries, starting off with places like Europe, are looking at it in an open manner, allowing such ecosystems to form in a much more amiable way, right? The second thing is about leveraging sensors and IoT. I think As an industry, the industry's been around for a really long time. But now is when, thanks to technology and Moore's law, we see a much more accelerated acceptance of this. We'll see a lot more activities that are happening on the edge, which means on the sensor itself, instead of having a processing that happens behind the scenes. The third one's about the experience, which has to go beyond the drive, point A to point B. I've said enough about it. The fourth one's about alliances, which will set the pace for these exchanges of data. There are multiple competing alliances. Big brands are coming together to sponsor an alliance, but are also co-investing in competing alliances, right? Or are a part of an alliance themselves. We see a lot of this in a very, very competitive field of open locations, right? Of location data. Grab takes a very different approach to it versus, say, for example, Gojek, right? Some are building this on their own, through primary tagging, whereas some of them are building this through alliances and partnerships. So if you have any questions or comments, more importantly, just as much, feel free to post them, and we would be happy to read out some of them to the audience as we go. The last thing is about monetization of data, and we'll quickly rush through each of them. Here's an example of how, not one example, but multiple examples of where this merging or bringing together of talent happens. We've not got the 2020 data. We'll need to update this one, I think. But if you look at until 2019 and the recent years, there is a lot of interest and investments, we're talking of multi-millions of dollars, into startups that are doing some cutting edge work. And you'll find that it gets into a very complex spider web sort of a world, because a lot of competing brands are investing into the same sort of a startup as they grow. And in some cases, they've come together to set up a joint venture and start a new company, whereas they would be competing outside of the market perhaps, right? And this becomes important because this is the only way by which adoption can be driven into mainstream consumer experiences. When it comes to sensors and IoT, the number of use cases, there's no end to it. While I am talking about passenger vehicles, if I were to look at it from an industrial vehicle point of view, or goods, movement vehicles for goods movements, the scope for it is massive. And in some cases, it's almost critically required for reasons of safety, right? Forklifts and whatnot. But let's stick to the passenger vehicle conversation. Jaguar partnered with CarFit, which is a startup again. They created, or rather, CarFit has a puck-shaped device, literally, weighing a few, maybe 100 grams or so, I think, which can track down NVH, noise, vibrations, as well as the harshness of the different movements. And these puck-shaped devices are placed post the car being sold, or at the point of sale. Either ways, they can be retrofitted into the vehicle. Right? And all of this data goes back to create a much better experience for the driver, down to the car seat positioning. All those corrections can be made, right? I think there is a possibility to look at these in the future as retrofitted devices, right? Which means you don't have to necessarily create vehicles with this in mind up front, though that's the ideal way going forward, I think. But you could always find a way to retrofit this into existing vehicles as well, and then see the data coming back to you and improving your experience, right? The third one, like I said, is about the experience that goes beyond the drive. Affectiva as a company, again, multiple levels of interest, right down from the likes of Hyundai to the Porsche, people at Porsche. Porsche has an app called Magic Moments. What it does is what Affectiva does is to take all of your visual emotions as you drive a car, take all of that and capture it and push it into this app called Magic Moments when there are happy moments as you drive. Right? Obviously, as a driver, you need to be safe. So you're not going to play with the app while driving. But after the drive, you can take all of those moments and push it into the Magic Moments app and relive those experiences and share it with your friends. So as an experience, if you're a Porsche driver out on a long drive to have some fun, this is the kind of thing that would enhance the driving experience to your later point and helps you relive this. Right. Pardon me. We spoke about alliances. If any of you are from these open location platforms, feel free to give us comments and any questions as well. I think almost all of the automotive world is now hooked onto it. There are multiple players that are working towards it. TomTom, Google's got its own things. Here is a big platform that does a lot of this work. And they've got investors from multiple sources, often competing. So you see BMW, Daimler, and Audi are in it. At the same time, you've got Bosch and Pioneer, which are tier one suppliers to the whole industry. Pioneer, in fact, I would think of them as an affiliate to the industry. Right? They are also invested in here because there's a lot of value that each of them can provide in the process, right? And the protocols are beginning to get unified. So the question to ask yourself is, what are these experiences that you can create? I think there's, yeah, is this all right? I'll continue that. Yeah. So the ability for you to look at all of this data purely from a location standpoint as one sliver of data, right? Admittedly, it's a big sliver of data. And there's so much more of magic that you can create by doing this. Some of it can be monetized, but more and more location data is becoming, table stakes. I think it's essential for that to be provided. And the last one is about monetization. At the end of the day, we're not in an altruistic world. We're not here to, we need to find value for ourselves as much. But the priority is to always create value for our customers. Honda has done a great job of it by tying up with Visa. This is in the US. Not just Visa, but a host of other brands, right? They've created companion apps, one for the driver and one for the passengers who are inside the Honda Dream Drive. And what it does is allow the driver to take up certain types of actions using voice, for example, while within the car, and for the passenger to have a more infotainment-based approach. And to get all of this done, they've tied up with multiple brands to make it easy, whether it's Grubhub or Starbucks, which is also included as part of this. All of that creates a much better experience, and you now find a way by which you can add that extra dollar to the revenue. And it probably works on a cloud basis, right? Pay per month basis, I would say. It's almost a value-add service on top of mobility as a service in some shape and form, I would think, right? But what becomes tricky here is, how do you make sure that the extra dollar you earned gets fairly split between you and your partner? This is where data plays a big role, but equally being open and transparent about where the value is getting created and how do you attribute it becomes very important, right? And this value could shift over a period of time with the same partner for the same type of transaction. But these are things that you'll have to factor in upfront and keep an eye on as you progress. Thankfully, technology makes this happen easily at scale, right? Just a screenshot from the Dream Drive to put us on the same page. So what we've heard so far is, one, how do you create ecosystems after we heard about the challenges of the industry? That was a framework that we spoke about. The second thing was about the 5 major trends we see in terms of where the ecosystem is headed. But here's where I think we talk about the brass tacks, about action that can be taken on a more immediate basis. Again, this is not to say that these are the only things that you should act on. Every one of us has our own path to how this can work out, but here's a few that we think works. And before that, a short piece about, if any of you, and I'm sure you don't have these doubts, are thinking, are ecosystems really going to be helpful? Here's research we've done in collaboration with MIT. MIT has a unit called CISR. Proud to say we are one of the 2 patrons for MIT across Asia Pac. DBS, coincidentally, is the second patron on the website. MIT CISR is what I'm talking about, which is the Center for Information Sciences and Research. What they're telling us is ecosystems do add value. Using a combination of cluster analysis across 158 or so samples that they looked at, they identified certain parameters or dimensions of design based on which ecosystems can be looked at. And 4 of those dimensions, closed versus open, the top 4 that you see, are a clear indicator of differentiating brands which can provide value and cannot provide value based on how they adopt the ecosystem. So what it tells is those brands which are more open when it comes to an ecosystem play are creating a lot more revenue for themselves, revenue growth. Those brands that are providing an ecosystem play to a broad customer mix, as opposed to very, very targeted customer mix, are also providing a lot more revenue growth for their stakeholders. And this reflects back on the examples I gave. While we spoke about luxury brands, we also spoke about more mass brands like Honda Dream Drive. And we see that having a broad customer segment to work with, multiple segments to work with, is actually more beneficial, like I said. So it's not just for the super premium brands. And this data point kind of validates that. Similarly, it's a natural notion to think, I'm going to be close-ended and allow only my products to sell on my platform. But what brands, to the contrary, have found through this research is, if you open up and allow competitors to also be there, it establishes a bridge of trust with your customers, and they will automatically fly closer to your brand at the end of the day, even though competitor brands are listed. And the final thing is about digital products being more prominent when it comes to growth drivers within the ecosystem. Right. So a call to action, please understand your customer's journey. At some level, I hate using the phrase customer journey map because I think it's been done to death by many of us consulting people at all. Do forgive me if you've not yet been exposed to customer journey maps, but it is a framework or a methodology based on which you understand your customers' interaction with you as a brand, or a day in the life of your customer, and sometimes a year in the life of your customer, and where you can be a part of it. But having said that, I think it still offers us a good chance to think of a long-term perspective and how we can insert ourselves along with an ecosystem play. Those are the critical lens we have to bear when thinking of the journey your customer takes, right? Have a culture that establishes change as a necessary agent and embraces it beautifully. Right, to all of you who are leading such initiatives within your organization, I'm sure if I were to take a poll right now, and I wish I did, uh, in hindsight, you would admit that cultural change is one of the toughest things to get success upon. Right? It is one of the things that finds the most amount of resistance, but inevitably has to be dealt with. And make sure that you measure everything that this is the other call to action. Even if you're halfway through the journey, find ways by which you can measure the value that's being created to your customer, the value that's being created to yourself and to the ecosystem or the partners, right? This is a study from McKinsey, friends across the pond. We looked at it and you can see the amount of impact that the whole ecosystem driven experiences is going to have through a lens of three different drivers, right? Recurring revenues from new services, aftermarkets, and one-time vehicle sales. Of course, it's from a report that's from late last year or middle of last year. In the post-COVID situation, I think each of these would have to be looked at much closer, right? And from an action standpoint, for any of you who are technologists or even otherwise, this is something you have to strictly wake up to. Creating this experience layer using APIs is not something that brands have done very well. When we talk about APIs, for a non-technical person, the first thought that comes is, this is the world of technology, let me ignore it. Or they think about it as the bolts and nuts that hold together the lowest layer of different mobile applications or systems. But that's not what it is about. We're talking about an API experience layer. You need to have a layer that connects the front-end experiences across different digital touch points and see how best can you enhance that to create value, right? Again, multiple companies are trying to solve this. It's not as straightforward as buying something off the shelf and making it plug in and start working. You need to think through what makes most sense for you as a brand, whether you're an OEM, whether you're a tier one, tier two supplier, or someone who's a part of the industry with a ringside view to it, right? We've taken a snapshot from Huawei's version of this within the IoT world for vehicle networking, but there's a lot more than this, than an oversimplified version to think about. And just a few thoughts of caution. Data is critical, but please be respectful of the privacy. It's getting more and more complex. You don't want to be in a liability situation. And undoing what you've done in terms of data design gets a lot more complex than the first time around. The second thing, payment and commerce, it's something that all of us should watch out for. And it's not just about payment and commerce from your brand side, but also from the consumer side. Be aware of all these changes that are happening. It's so vast and quick that there's no point in talking about it in any presentation. It would have changed by the time you put together those slides. And the last thing is innovation comes with its share of risk. I'll be honest, a lot of brands have started pushing out some of the spends that they want to do. And that is a little bit of delay in taking up some initiatives. But at the same time, we find many brands that are very enterprising and tell, look, I'm not going to blow the bank and spend a huge amount of money on transformational initiatives, but here are the three quick things that I can do within the next 6 to 8 weeks. And that's something that's going to yield immediate results for me, visible, concrete financial results, right? So that's the kind of approach that probably makes sense if budget is a constraint. And I'm sure it's a constraint for a lot of us right now, right? So take the first step, right? The metaphorical wheel is right in front of you, not just for the industry. We strongly believe and have done this, it takes about 4 to 6 weeks, costs less than an everyday car. I'm talking of Singapore prices with COE included, right? Just to be clear, right? And I think this is a journey that's worth taking up when times are a little slow right now. It gives us the clarity of thought and place to think about, right? So that's the end of my presentation. 5 extra minutes than what I thought. I'll take a pause now. Thank you. Vimen, can you hear me? Let me go to the Q&A part.
Yep. We can just go into the Q&A portion.
Yes. So the first question was, could you share a good example of an automotive company working with a startup towards these trends? Yes, I think in the presentation itself, I've managed to show a few of them already. And what's important to note is this is not limited to one high-end brand or just the luxury brands in the industry. It's happening across the board as we speak. I mean, as we speak, I'm working with two big automotive mass appeal brands, one from Japan and one from, both are Asian, of course, trying to solve very different problems. Some of them are headed towards addressing how do I enter this new market where my vehicle sells, but it doesn't do a great job of being present as a proper brand. Whereas some others are talking about, I need to move into the mobility as a service space. How do I do that, right? And both these cases, we've realized that while many things need to happen, the ecosystem that they have to build, the sort of partnerships that they need to do is becoming critical. And the top management of both these organizations or enterprises have taken note of it, right? Within the presentation itself, I gave you examples of Honda with its ability to tie up with Chevron, GrabHub, and everyone else, though those are not startups. But if you look at what Effectiva is doing, they're working with Porsche on one side. They're also working with Hyundai on another side. Both of these were presented at CES, which is the Consumer Electronics Show held at Las Vegas. The Hyundai one was presented last year, if I'm not mistaken, and the Porsche one was the year before that, right? Now, this is a case where Effectiva, using a combination of visual plus emotional artificial intelligence, which is far mature than we think, and is taking that into the car directly, right? So I hope I've answered that question. I think I've got one more question before, which I'll look at. In your opinion, which countries in the region are well positioned to capitalize on digital innovation in the automotive industry? China is one of those that's really, really cracking the code, right? And understandably, it's cracking it in its own terms and conditions within its own walled environments, right? They will have a challenge in terms of scaling it and bringing it outside the country. And the way I look at it is we will slowly start seeing the emergence of two competing areas. There'll be a set of countries which are driven by the Chinese ecosystem, technology, as well as startup ecosystem and experiences, right? And there'll be one that's driven by the incumbents, the existing big four players of the automotive world, and all the startups that are challenging them coming together, right? And the countries will also align according to them. I don't see a case where too many countries will coexist with both of these, will have both these, competing areas coexisting. Apart from that, the other countries where I think progress is really good is Taiwan. Singapore is doing a fantastic job, obviously, right? Singapore's land scarcity, let me just look at some of them. Yeah. Would Singapore's land scarcity be an obstacle to the development of such an ecosystem? And there's only limited. So that's a very good question. The question is, will Singapore's land scarcity create a challenge in this kind of an ecosystem? And I've got an answer that may not completely address your question. I think we as Singapore should not worry about ourselves as purely consumers, right? As a customer base that you want to sell to. If you have the chance to play an ASEAN regional role, an Asia Pac or a global role, Singapore is a perfect test bed for all such ideas, working well with the regulator and for innovation and such ecosystems to originate here, right? We already do a great job of it in the banking world, right? We should also be able to do this in the automotive world and take it to a global audience. So I see ourselves as a bedrock for such automotive innovation. And through A-Star, SGInnovate, and quite a few of such government agencies, I think we're really on top of the game. There's one good comment. I'll read it out from a consumer point of view. It's not a question, just a comment. I'm reading it verbatim. From a consumer point of view, increasingly high costs of car ownership would certainly dent development, and I foresee a shift away from car ownership to an increased use of ride sharing plus public transport. That's a fantastic point of view, right? I kind of sense the same thing, but instead of my personal views, while it is a professional view, I would also look at my peers' professional views. Thank you for that, whoever shared it. At the same time, I think there is an alternate school of thought which tells there'll be an increased purchase of vehicles, at least for the two-wheelers, because they don't come at a very high cost, so that you can create your safe zone and not worry about being infected, in the current scenario or the future. One last question, perhaps. Do you have any tips or guidelines on forming strategic partnerships to ensure a good working relationship, especially if you're a smaller company trying to work with big organizations? Absolutely. I'll open that response with an underlying statement. you'd be surprised, a lot of large enterprises are very, very open-minded and give you a fair share of the value that you create, right? The more important part of your question is there a framework based on which you can make sure that this works well when you work with large enterprises? Yes, we do have a framework for that. Unfortunately, I could not include it in the presentation because it comes down to the working level. But in the white paper, right, if you can write to the email ID that you see on the screen right now behind the question box, I would be able to share the white paper with you as we progress, I think. But when we engage with our clients, there is a rich framework that we bring together where we collaboratively work with you to come out with the best ways by which this partnership works with your with enterprise you want to partner with the big brand you want to partner with, right? So what's important to note is it's a matter of horses for courses, right? Many of these enterprises are looking for top talent, top ideas, and intellectual property coming from the startups. But you have to be clear about what's the nature of partnership. As much as it's all about collaboration, where does your role end and where does your role begin, and yet be collaborative? What's the combined value you create to the customer, and how do you monetize it? We run this in the form of workshops, but hopefully when you read the white paper, you'll get a little more insights into it. So I'll take a pause here. Women, I've not seen any more questions. I've answered the main ones, at least I hope. Thanks a lot for the questions. It's been really, really nice of all of you, I think, to both comment as well as ask the questions. And thank you for your patience in sitting through the whole discussion, the webinar. I hope you found value in of the content, as did some of the clients in Singapore as well as Shanghai in the past, right? Feel free to reach out. You can see my email ID over there, and I would be able to share the white paper happily once we, once I know what's your email ID, I think, if that's okay with you. Thank you. Vimen, over to you.
Thank you, Suresh. I think that's a very wonderful presentation. So for all the attendees that have joined us until now, thank you for keeping up and also sending in so many wonderful questions. So we've come to the end of this webinar, this presentation. So as mentioned by Suresh, if there's any questions or maybe if you have any collaboration suggestions, feel free to reach out to Suresh through his email, or also you may send in an email to events@sginnovate.com. We will be sending out a post-event email for a copy of Suresh's slides. And also do keep a lookout for all our other events that is to come on SGInnovate website. So with that, I would like to conclude this session. Once again, thank you, Suresh, for the wonderful presentation. And thank you all for joining us for today. And with that, I would like to just commemorate this event with just a very quick picture to be taken with Suresh. So Suresh, can I just have you to just do a wave in front of the computer? Yep, just yes. Oh, wait, sorry, just give me a moment. Okay, one more time. Yep. And one more. Yes, and okay, thank you so much. Okay, so once again, thank you everyone. Yeah, hope to see you all join us next time. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.